Hey everyone, I want you to watch this scene.
Güey, güey, eso no existe, güey.
Ya sé, cabrón, pero Luisa quiere ir.
This scene is from Me to Mamá También, the 2001 film directed by the amazing Mexican filmmaker Alfonso Cuarón. This scene appears roughly 26 minutes into the film's start, and it consists of our two main characters, Julio, played by Gael García Bernal, wandering around his apartment while talking to Tenoch, our other main character, played by Diego Luna. During this scene, we learn a couple of things. First, they are going on a trip to a beach called Heaven's Mount.
A boca del cielo.
Not only the two of them, they are also going with Luisa, the wife of Tenoch's cousin. Secondly, we learn that the beach they are going to, Heaven's Mount, doesn't really exist.
Güey, eso no existe, güey.
Ya sé, cabrón.
Now, at first glance, this scene might seem simple and unassuming. But in my opinion, this scene is one of the, if not the most important scene in the film. And this is because the scene contains this line,
Güey, eso no existe, güey.
but it doesn't exist. Out of all the many lines throughout the film, this line is the most important line of the film, as it completely changes how the audience sees and interprets the film. So how does it change the film exactly? Well, in this video, I'll dissect how this one simple line helps us to see the meaning of Y tu Mamá También through its different layers of reflection of the world. First of all, of course this line is important because it is included in the dialogue where the film essentially starts its plot. Before this scene, Julio and Tenoch, these two teenagers from Mexico City, are aimless, drifting throughout their summer doing nothing while their girlfriends are away in Italy. They meet Lisa, the aforementioned person who joins them on their road trip. They flirt with her and invite her on a road trip to a secluded beach they claim to know. At first, she refuses, but after discovering her husband's infidelity and receiving a terminal cancer diagnosis which is revealed late in the film, Luisa decides to join them. The scene you watched before is the scene where Julio and Tenoch realize that they are actually going on this road trip and Luisa is going with them. Then, the film continues as the three set out on the journey, improvising their way through rural Mexico. Throughout their travels, Julio and Tenoch's friendship begins to crack under the surface as they fight over class differences, jealousy, and sexual competitiveness. While the tension continues to rise, they miraculously end up on a beach where they discover Heaven's Mouth somehow exists. After spending some time at the beach, they later engage in a threesome that culminates in Julio and Tenoch sharing an intimate kiss. The next morning, Luisa quietly leaves them behind and spends her final days alone at the beach before dying of cancer. After the trip, Julio and Tenoch drift apart, only reuniting briefly a year later, where they acknowledge Luisa's death but find their friendship permanently changed. But besides helping to shape the plot of the film, the line before is also important because it creates an expectation for the audience. When we watch films, we don't know what the story will be. But as we keep watching more and more films, we recognize patterns of how the film shares its stories and in what shape they show them. This act of watching films over time familiarizes us with what films might be, making the next film we'll watch be easier for us to understand and anticipate what might happen next. This process of familiarization is a natural part of how our minds work. That's literally how we survive. Therefore, when we watch Y tu Mamá También, the way the film moves and tells its story already brings up a set of assumptions with us, shaped by everything we've seen before. As the film continues, we rely on these assumptions to guide us, and we start predicting what we think will happen next based on the evidence the film gives us. So what are these expectations? While we're watching this film, it becomes obvious quickly that the film itself can be seen as both a coming-of-age story and a road trip film, which are two very recognizable genre tropes for most viewers. not only from the simple patterns like Julio and Tenoch being a typical example of a coming-of-age film usually has young, immature characters as its lead actors, or the road trip that they are going on will significantly change the way they are currently, just like all the road trip films usually are, but also from the film's way of applying these tropes to the core of the film. Like the way it uses the loss of innocence trope that's common in coming-of-age stories. In Mamá También, the loss of innocence unfolds on the way it intertwines sexual initiation, mortality, and social awareness. Julio and Tenoch begin as immature adolescents, bragging about sexual exploits and treating women as conquests. But Luisa's presence dismantles this attitude. Their final threesome forces them to confront hidden insecurities and the suppressed tension between them. This sexual awakening is sharpened by their confrontation with death, as Luisa's terminal cancer reframes the journey not as a carefree adventure but as her final embrace of life, accelerating the boy's passage into adulthood. Layered over this is a quieter awakening to social realities. The film's foreground keeps their rivalry and loss in focus, while the background reveals Mexico's poverty and inequality. Julio and Tenoch rarely notice it, but like an overlooked detail in a frame, these realities linger and eventually reshape the meaning of their trip. Together, these threads show how the boy's innocence erodes through overlapping revelations about desire, mortality, and society. Meanwhile, the road trip tropes in the film are also as central as the coming-of-age elements. Beyond the obvious road trip itself, the film emphasizes how the journey matters more than the destination itself, since the changes Julio and Tenoch undergo always happen on the road rather than at the place they hope to reach. The road becomes less about geography than about charting emotional changes, as their movement across Mexico mirrors the disintegration of their friendship. They begin carefree and united, but as they travel more, insecurities, betrayals, and class resentment rise to the surface until the bond cannot survive. Their imagined destination, Heaven's Mouth, functions like many road movie goals does, giving direction of the trip but also reflecting their desires. Yet by the time they stumble on the beach by accident, the real transformation has already occurred. This emphasis on the journey is reinforced through detours and improvisations, since their unplanned stops at roadside eateries, villages, and fishing communities create the most meaningful encounters of the whole trip, both with Mexico and with each other. Even their final threesome unfolds spontaneously, showing how the road trip trope is used in its most recognizable form, where what matters is never the end, but the path that leads to it. I brought these tropes up because that's the evidence of what the film sets up to expect. But here's the catch. All of that expectation, it's all lies. And that's where the line before comes to play, as it symbolizes these lies. If you watch the film, you know that although they lie about the beach, at the end, they miraculously find Heaven's Mouth, which happens to exist. The film subverts our expectations of thinking there's nothing in the end. And this symbolizes our other expectation of the film. Because although the films before meet the expectations we have, which are the tropes of the coming-of-age and road trip films, in closer, deeper analysis of those elements, they are also subverted by the film. In a traditional story, the loss of innocence guides characters toward clarity and growth. But for Julio and Tenoch, it becomes an awkward and destabilizing experience. Their sexual encounters with Luisa, which culminate in the threesome, reveals repressed desires that change them. But as their insecurities and jealousy from before still hold strong, this experience ends up fracturing rather than strengthening their friendship, turning the trope upside down by dismantling their bond instead of leading to stability. The same inversion applies to mortality. While these stories often use death to give young characters perspective and maturity, Luisa's terminal illness and eventual death never transform Julio and Tenoch at all. It simply falls on deaf ears, as her absence is not a revelation about the fragility of life, but more of a sad footnote in their personal history. The film overturns the convention of mortality as a rite of passage, and uses it as a way to show how sad life can truly be. The social awakening common to coming-of-age films is also displaced, since although Mexico's inequalities are revealed in detail, they remain unnoticed by Julio and Tenoch, who are distracted by sex, rivalry, and ego. The road trip tropes also follow a similar pattern of reversal. Traditionally, the road itself transforms the characters, leading them to a destination that offers meaning or resolution. Here, the road is transformative, but only in the sense that it destroys the illusions Julio and Tenoch hold about themselves and their friendship and the world. The longer they travel with each other, their rivalry, betrayals, and class resentment become more and more obvious, tearing them apart rather than bringing them closer together. By the time they reach the beach, what they once saw as paradise feels kinda empty, because the real transformation has already happened, and it has left their bond in ruins. Even the detours take on another meaning. Julio and Tenoch, fixated on sex, rivalry, and tension, do not care about the larger world around them during the trip. The detours are meaningful, but not to the boys at that moment. In this way, the film subverts the road trip tradition by making the journey transformative, but only in ways the boys cannot yet understand. This subversion looks clearer and makes more sense if we analyze another important part of the film. Throughout the film, while it uses a normal linear story, Mamá También also uses narration to help fill the whole of the story.
Aunque nunca lo externara, el padre de Cecilia, un pediatra especialista en alergias, Luisa Cortés era huérfana desde los 10 años, cuando sus padres murieron en un accidente automovilístico. Julio Zapata vivía con su madre y su hermana.
This narration not only reveals some unknown reflections and revelations about the trio's life, but it also shares some facts about what's happening in the real world. The narrator also shares the lives of the people our trio encounters during the trip, the news that is breaking at that time, and what happens to those people after encountering the characters in the film. Using this framing device, telling it using a more informative angle instead of a melodramatic one, and also from the way Julio and Tenoch behave in their flash-forward scene, we can see that Julio and Tenoch see this trip in the future not as a beautiful or powerful moment in their lives that transformed them completely, but more as one of those moments in their life that shows them the world. It is not one of those whole new experiences that serves as a wake-up call for characters in their coming-of-age or road trip stories. It's just this unique moment that makes them realize how the world works. While it's technically a coming-of-age story and a road trip story, and it also has those tropes, the film suffers our expectations, working as a deconstruction of the coming-of-age and road trip genre tropes. It reveals the film's take on what those genre tropes actually would be if they took place in real life. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. The beautiful maturity we expect from those stories doesn't always happen to anyone. But while the line before already shows layers of the way the film works, what truly makes the line so important and special is when we see it in its symptomatic meaning. The film is made during times of political and societal change. Mexico has elected a new president from a different party, instead of the usual ruling party, where the presidents of the last 71 years have come from, ending their dominance. Hope is starting to rise, and democracy can finally be felt through the air. The line before symbolizes this. But if we look at this line again and see the big elements of subversion that are shown from the story and the narration before, the line sadly works as a warning. While in the end, the trio end up at the beach, nothing changes. Instead of having these transformative feelings, the beach, the things that they do there, even the whole trip becomes more of a point in their life that happens, not something that particularly stands out. Because nothing ever changes. The problems they have before the trip will occur again after the trip, much like every element of our life. Symptomatically, this reflects what Mexican society deals with in the aftermath of the big political and societal change. Although they reach this uncharted territory filled with these countless potentials, just like Julio and Tenoch, the same problems the government and the country had before the change will still remain. This is why the simple line in the beginning scene, for me, is the most important in the film. Through these simple combinations of words, they manage to encapsulate the fragile tension between illusion and reality that drives the entire story. What begins as a simple lie becomes the thread that binds the journey, shaping how we view the characters, their fleeting friendships, and the world they move through. By the time the breach is revealed, what might have been a moment of validation and a time for change instead feels like a quiet irony, reminding us that truth and falsehood are never as far apart as they seem, and that every ending carries both revelation and disappointment. And this cannot be truer when we see the fact.
That's all, folks.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe.